In this video, I'm going to share the podcast equipment and setup that I use to host the Startup Playbook podcast, as well as talk about 3 things that you should really think about when deciding what podcast equipment and setup is right for you. Hi, if we're meeting for the first time, my name is Rohit Bhargava and I am the host of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts from around the world. I've interviewed and published over 100 episodes, and the podcast has been running for close to 3 years now. And over that time period, a lot of the listeners of the show have sent in questions that they have about podcasting and content. One of the most frequently asked questions is what podcasting equipment and setup that I use for the show. And so I thought that instead of responding to a bunch of emails with a set of links, I would put together a video and show you behind the scenes look at all of the equipment that I use and how I piece the show together. So let's get into it. This is what the final setup looks like. Let's jump to the start. So the first bit of equipment that I want to tell you about is the microphone that I use, and that is the Rode Procaster. Now I have 2 of these, one for the guest and one for myself, and I'll usually add this to an adjustable stand so that we can make that experience as comfortable as possible for the guest, and I add a pop filter on top just to smooth out the audio quality coming through. Now the Rode Procasters are great microphones, but they don't actually store any of the audio files coming through, and that's where the H5 Zoom comes in. So using DAP cables, I can connect up my H5 Zoom to the 2 Rode Procasters, which will then allow me to capture the audio coming through from each of the microphones separately, which really helps in the post-production process as well as the audio quality overall. Now, one of the worst things that you can do as a podcaster, which I've definitely done before, is to record an incredible interview only to find out later that the interview itself didn't actually record. Hi Paul, welcome back to the Startup Playbook podcast, and let's hope that we record this conversation this time.
It was good, thank you for the dress rehearsal. Thanks for having me back.
For those people listening at home, Paul and I had an amazing conversation yesterday that we thought that we'd recorded, but
we're going to try and recreate it for you now.
Yes. And so one of the ways that I get past this is by using a micro amplifier. Specifically, I use the Behringer Microamp HA400. And what this lets me do is plug this into my H5 Zoom, as well as connect up 2 headphones to it so I can listen back to the audio while we're actually doing the recording. So if there's any particular background noise, or if the audio quality isn't coming through, or if it's not actually recording, I can pick that up straight away and rectify it. So one of the things that I was really conscious of right from the very beginning was to make sure that there was some form of consistent theme or branding as part of all of the show, just to tie everything together. And the way that I did this was to use a little lightbox for each episode. Every guest that I have on the show has a photo with this lightbox, and this means that every time we're sharing photos on social media or it's being spread, it's helping provide additional exposure for the show itself. One of the things that I really wanted to expand the podcast out into is video, and so now for every episode I use my Canon 80D and attach that to a tripod and record every single conversation on video as well. As I mentioned at the start of this video, one of the questions that I get asked the most frequently is what podcast equipment should I use to first get started? And the answer really is it depends. This is the equipment and setup that I'm comfortable with and that works for me, but it might not necessarily be the right one for you. So I think there are 3 simple questions that you can ask yourself to help you figure out what would be the right equipment for you. The first question is, where and how will you do the recordings? If you have a semi-permanent setup like I do, where the guests come to you, maybe it does make more sense for you to have this larger equipment that you can take the time to set up. But if you're going to be more mobile, you need something that's a little bit easier to carry and will be more accessible for you when you're traveling out to your guests. The second question is, what equipment are you the most comfortable with? Having all of these add-ons like an amplifier and headphones makes that process a little bit easier for me, so I can focus more on the podcast and the content. And so you want to find whatever equipment will help you feel the most comfortable and natural so that you can focus more on creating great content rather than having to worry about the equipment. The third and probably the most important question is which equipment and setup will make sure that you launch and get out there as quickly as possible. You see, this entire setup took me years to accumulate, and including all of the cameras and all of the equipment probably cost me about $3,000 or $4,000, which when I first got started, I certainly didn't have the money to invest. And it's kind of embarrassing to say, but my entire setup for the first year of my podcast was this. a little H1 zoom on a tripod, and I would put this between me and my guest and ask my guest to sit as closely as possible to me so that we could get the best possible audio quality coming through. When it comes to podcasting and storytelling, the most important thing is content. No one will listen to your podcast because you have the most amazing podcast equipment or setup. They will listen to it because they really engage with the content and the story that you're trying to tell. When I first started with the podcast, I knew that I could get better equipment, get better at post-production, ask better questions, but unless if I put something out there that was valuable for people, it really didn't matter. So my final bit of advice to you from this video is focus less on the equipment and focus more on the content and the story that you're trying to tell. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions at all about podcasting, content, or marketing that you'd like me to make videos about, either send me a message or leave a comment below. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.